Homework 2.2, more on functions, video 1. Homework is due Friday, May 22nd, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. Let me go ahead and get it out of the way. More on functions is 3 words, not 2 words. I do not know what a moron function is, but the title of this section is More on Functions. Okay. So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit more about functions and things about their graphs. In most of these problems, the graphs will already be given to you, so you don't have to worry about actually graphing these functions. The first topic we're going to talk about in this section is called increasing, decreasing, and constant. Now, these adjectives are referring to outputs or to the y values on the graph, if you will. If you were to think about this graph like a roller coaster that's moving from left to right. Typically when you think about moving along a graph, you normally think about moving from left to right. So for example, as we're moving from left to right along this graph, what are the y values doing? Well, they're getting higher, aren't they? So it would be correct to say that the graph is increasing on this portion. Now you could argue, what if you were going right to left? Well, then it would be decreasing, but we're not going right to left, are we? So these adjectives are all assuming that we are moving from left to right on this graph. So this graph starts increasing until it hits this peak, and then guess what it's doing after it crosses this peak? It's decreasing. Because the y values, the outputs, are getting smaller as we progress from left to right. Now, there are some graphs where the y values are not changing. For example, when we hit this bottom corner here and then keep progressing from left to right, the y values are all staying the same because you're going neither up nor down. We say that the y values are constant on that portion of the graph. So intuitively, I think the concept of increasing, decreasing, and constant is pretty easy, as long as you remember that you're moving from left to right. Increasing is when the graph is going up, decreasing is when it's going down, constant is when it's flat. Now, there is some debate on what's happening at a single moment in time when you transition between 2 types of movement, vertically speaking. For example, when you are at this peak, if you were to take a picture of a roller coaster car up here, granted, this would be a bad roller coaster because of the sharp corners, but let's not get into a calculus discussion. But if we were moving up here and then we were at the top and somebody took a picture, would you say that at this moment in time, right here, are you currently increasing or decreasing? Well, the problem is you're either doing both or you're doing neither. There's really no reason to say that you're doing one versus the other. I like to think at this point you're transitioning between the 2, so you're technically doing neither. And the same thing right here. At this point, are we decreasing or are we constant? You could argue that you're constant because the y value here is the same as all these y values, but along the same lines of transitioning from increasing to decreasing at this maximum point, we could argue that we're transitioning from decreasing to constant at this point here. Now, why am I bringing that up? Because in your homework, when you're given a graph and asked where is it increasing, decreasing, or constant, we're going to be using interval notation, meaning from one number to another, and we have to decide whether to use parentheses or brackets. A bracket implies that you're being included, and a parentheses implies that you're being excluded. So at these points, we are going to exclude them from describing am I increasing or decreasing. So how would we describe this? Well, let's think about when you are increasing on this graph. Where does this graph begin in terms of x values? Looks like it begins at 2. And where does it stop increasing? If I do it correctly, this is at 5. Yeah. So between 2 and 5, this graph is increasing. So we could say that it's increasing on the interval 2, 5. Now the important thing to notice here is that this interval is an interval of x values, not an interval of y values. because the adjective increasing is describing what the y values are doing, the interval is the interval of x values over which the y values are doing their thing, in this case increasing. So what do you think we would say about the next portion of the graph, where we transition from increasing to decreasing? Well, at 5, we switch from increasing to decreasing, and how long do we keep decreasing? Until we hit this point, and what is this point's x-coordinate? 7. So we could say that this graph is decreasing on the interval 5 to 7. And again, this is an interval of x values. When we are on this portion of the x-axis, the graph is going down. Now you might be wondering, once again, why do these both have parentheses instead of brackets? Isn't this point included on the graph? Isn't this point included on the graph? And isn't this point included on the graph? Of course, all those points are included on the graph, but the reason we're using parentheses instead of brackets when describing where a function's graph is increasing or decreasing is because at the point where it changes, for example, here at x equals 5, we change from increasing to decreasing. Either we're doing both or we're doing neither. I think it would be silly to say that we're both increasing and decreasing simultaneously, so we'll just say that we're doing neither. And as a consequence, we remove that value from the interval because we're not increasing at 5, and we're not decreasing at 5 either. We're kind of in transition. So guess what happens over here? Or guess how we're going to describe what happens over here? Or we're going to say the same thing. This graph is constant on some interval. At what point does the graph start being constant? This one. So it starts being constant at x equals 7. And this graph ceases to be constant. In fact, the graph ceases over here. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it would be correct to say that this graph is increasing on the interval 2 to 5 because that's the interval of x values over which the graph is going up. Decreasing on the interval 5 to 7 because that's the interval of x values in which the graph is going down. And constant on the interval 7 to 12 because that is the interval of x values for which the graph is flat or the y values are constant. Now you may notice over here I've started setting up a definition, but I think I will begin the second video by giving you the strict definition of what it means for a function to be increasing on an interval, decreasing on an interval, or constant on an interval.